I never talked about what happened in the valley. Not to my wife, not to my kids, not even to the other guys in my unit who were there that day. For 37 years, I carried it locked inside a place so deep that sometimes I wondered if I'd imagined the whole thing. But you don't imagine the kind of weight that sits on your chest at 3 in the morning, making sleep impossible. You don't imagine the face of a man you should have killed but didn't. My name is Robert Mitchell, and I served 2 tours in Vietnam with the 101st Airborne Division. I was 22 years old when I deployed, fresh out of basic training, convinced I was going to be a hero. The jungle had other plans for me. It stripped away every illusion I had about war, about courage, about what it means to be a soldier. By the time I came home in 1972, I was a different person entirely. Quieter, harder, haunted by decisions I couldn't explain to anyone, including myself. I settled in Charleston, South Carolina after my discharge, got a job at the shipyard, married a good woman named Linda, raised 2 daughters. I built a normal life, or at least the appearance of one. But there were always the nights. The endless, sleepless nights when I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying that day in the valley over and over again. Linda learned not to ask about my nightmares. She'd just hold my hand in the darkness, waiting for morning to come. The shipyard became my refuge. Physical work, honest labor, the kind of exhaustion that sometimes let me sleep for a few hours. I welded and cut steel for 33 years, losing myself in the roar of machinery and the shower of sparks. My co-workers knew I was a veteran, but nobody pushed for details. That was the unspoken agreement among men of my generation. We didn't talk about the war. We just lived with it. It was a Tuesday morning in October 2009 when everything changed. I was in the break room drinking coffee that tasted like motor oil when Jenkins from the administrative office found me. "Mitchell, there's someone here to see you," he said, looking uncomfortable. "Says it's personal, military-related." My stomach tightened. After all these years, I still got nervous when anything connected to my service came up. I followed Jenkins to the front office, my boots heavy on the concrete floor. Through the glass door, I could see a man waiting. He was Asian, probably in his early 50s, wearing a simple button-down shirt and slacks. He stood with a rigid posture that I recognized immediately. Military bearing never really goes away. When I entered the office, he turned to face me. His eyes were dark and direct, but there was something else there too. Respect, maybe, or recognition. "Sergeant Mitchell?" he asked, his English accented but clear. "Just Mitchell now," I said, offering my hand. "Haven't been a sergeant in a long time." He shook it firmly. "My name is Nguyen Thanh Duc. I believe you knew my father." The name hit me like a mortar round. Nguyen, the valley, the rice paddy. Everything I'd spent decades trying to forget came rushing back in a single overwhelming wave. I must have gone pale because Duke reached out to steady me. "Perhaps we should sit down," he suggested gently. Jenkins brought us water and left us alone in a small conference room. I sat across from Duke, my hands shaking slightly. After all these years of silence, the past had finally found me. Part of me had always known it would. "How did you find me?" I asked, my voice rough. "It took many years," Duke replied. "My father kept records, documents. After he died 6 months ago, I found them among his things. Your name was there along with others from your unit, but yours was circled in red ink, underlined. I had to know why." I closed my eyes, transported back to that humid afternoon in 1971. The Quang Tri province just south of the DMZ. Our unit had been tracking a squad of North Vietnamese regulars for 3 days through dense jungle and across flooded paddies. The heat was murderous, the mosquitoes relentless. We were exhausted, running on adrenaline and bad sea rations. "What did your father tell you?" I asked, opening my eyes to meet Duke's steady gaze. "He told me that an American soldier spared his life when he should have killed him. He said this soldier looked him in the eyes and made a choice that changed everything, but he never explained why." For the rest of his life, my father struggled with that question. "Why did you let him live, Sergeant Mitchell?" The memory was crystalline now, every detail sharp and painful. We'd cornered them in a small valley, 3 VC soldiers separated from their unit. There had been a brief firefight. 2 of them went down. The third, Duke's father, had his rifle jam. I came around a bamboo thicket and found him there, frantically trying to clear the malfunction. He looked up at me and our eyes locked. He was young, maybe 19 or 20, thin from months in the jungle. His hands were bleeding from the sharp edges of the rifle mechanism. In that frozen moment, I saw everything clearly. The terror in his eyes, the resignation. He knew he was dead. He stopped trying to fix his weapon and just waited for me to pull the trigger. I was supposed to take him prisoner or eliminate the threat, I said slowly, the words feeling heavy in my mouth. Those were the rules of engagement. But when I looked at him, I didn't see an enemy combatant. I saw a scared kid who probably got drafted just like me, who probably had a family back home worrying about him, just like mine was worrying about me. Duke leaned forward, listening intently. My rifle was aimed at his chest, I continued. My finger was on the trigger. I had every tactical and legal right to shoot, but I couldn't do it. Something in his eyes stopped me. It wasn't fear exactly. It was something deeper. Recognition, maybe. Like we both understood in that moment that we were just tools in someone else's war. What did you do? Duke asked quietly. I lowered my rifle and gestured for him to run. He just stared at me like he didn't understand. I remember saying, Didi Mao, go quickly. I probably butchered the pronunciation, but he understood. He looked at me for another second, then dropped his jammed rifle and ran into the jungle. I fired 3 rounds into the air and reported that the target had escaped into heavy cover. The conference room was silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning. Duke sat back in his chair, processing what I'd told him. My unit commander chewed me out for letting him get away, I added. Said I was soft, questioned whether I had what it took to be a soldier. Maybe he was right. I spent the next year of my tour second-guessing that decision every single day. And after you came home? Duke asked. After I came home, the second-guessing got worse. I'd lie awake wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake, wondering if that soldier I let go killed other Americans, wondering if good men died because of my moment of weakness. The not knowing ate at me. It still does. Duke reached into his bag and pulled out a worn leather journal. He placed it on the table between us and opened it carefully. The pages were filled with Vietnamese script in neat, careful handwriting. This was my father's diary, Duke explained. He kept it throughout the war and for years afterward. He wrote about that day many times. Would you like to know what he said? I nodded, not trusting my voice. Duke began translating, his voice steady but emotional. April 17th, 1971. Today I should have died in the valley. My rifle jammed, and I was defenseless. An American soldier found me. He was young like me, with eyes that had seen too much death. He could have killed me easily. Instead, he let me live. I ran back to our lines and my commander called me a coward for losing my weapon. But I know the truth. That American soldier showed me something I thought impossible in war. He showed me mercy. I will never forget his face or what he did. I felt tears building behind my eyes. After all these years, to finally know what happened next. Duke turned several pages and continued. There are many entries after that. My father wrote that the encounter changed him. He began questioning the war, questioning why we were fighting. 3 months after you spared him, he was wounded in action and sent to a hospital in Hanoi. While recovering, he made the decision to request a transfer to a non-combat role. He spent the rest of the war as a supply clerk. He survived the war, I asked, my voice thick. He did. He came home to our village in 1975 after the reunification. He married my mother, became a teacher. He taught history and literature for 35 years. He raised 4 children. Because of your decision, Sergeant Mitchell, my father lived a long life. I exist because you chose mercy over duty that day. The tears came then, hot and unstoppable. All those years of guilt, of wondering, of sleepless nights, thinking I'd made a catastrophic mistake. And here was the answer. I hadn't created more death. I'd created life, a family, a future. Duke pulled out a photograph from the journal and slid it across the table. It showed an older Vietnamese man surrounded by a large family. Children and grandchildren crowded around him, all smiling at the camera. The man in the center had gray hair and deep wrinkles, but I recognized those eyes. The same eyes that had looked at me in the valley 38 years ago. My father had 9 grandchildren, Duke said softly. All because you made a choice that day. A choice that went against your training, against your orders, maybe even against your survival instincts. He never forgot you, Sergeant Mitchell. And he never slept easy either, wondering if you were punished for letting him live, wondering if you regretted your decision. I stared at the photograph, trying to take it all in. 9 grandchildren, a lifetime of teaching, all the ripples of that single moment in the valley. Why did he never try to find me, I asked. He wanted to, Duke replied. Many times over the years he considered it, but he was afraid. Afraid that making contact would bring you trouble. Afraid that you didn't want to be reminded. Afraid that maybe you regretted what you'd done. It wasn't until he was dying that he told me the whole story and made me promise to find you. What did he want you to tell me? Duke's eyes glistened with emotion. He wanted you to know that your mercy saved more than just his life. It saved his soul. After that day, he could never hate Americans the way he was supposed to. He could never see the enemy as inhuman monsters, because one enemy soldier had looked at him and seen a human being worth sparing. That changed everything for him. He spent the rest of his life teaching his students and children that even in the darkest times, even in war, humanity can survive. Your action became his proof of that. I couldn't speak. The weight that had pressed on my chest for 37 years was lifting, replaced by something I hadn't felt in decades: peace, maybe even redemption. He also wanted me to tell you something else, Duke continued. He wanted you to know that you were right to spare him, that your moment of mercy was not weakness but strength, that by refusing to take his life, you proved yourself to be exactly the kind of man that should carry a weapon. Because you understood the weight of that power. We sat in silence for a long moment. Through the window, I could see the shipyard continuing its normal operations. Cranes moving, workers welding, the ordinary rhythm of life continuing. But inside this small conference room, something profound was happening. A circle was closing. A wound was healing. "There's more," Duke said, reaching into his bag again. He pulled out a small wooden box, intricately carved with traditional Vietnamese patterns. "My father left this for you. He worked on it for 3 years before he died, even when his hands were shaky from age. He wanted you to have it." I took the box carefully. It was surprisingly heavy, crafted from dark hardwood. When I opened it, I found a hand-carved figurine inside. It depicted 2 soldiers facing each other, one with his rifle lowered, the other with his hands raised. The detail was extraordinary. You could see the expressions on their faces, the exhaustion in their postures, the moment of recognition between them. Beneath the figurine was a folded letter. I took it out with trembling hands and unfolded it. The text was in English, written in careful, precise handwriting. "Dear Sergeant Mitchell," I read aloud, "I have thought of you almost every day for 37 years. I have wondered if you were well, if you found peace, if you ever knew what became of me. Now, as I near the end of my life, I want you to know the truth. Your decision to spare me was not a mistake. It was an act of profound courage and humanity. You gave me the gift of life, and I tried to honor that gift every day. I taught hundreds of students, I raised a family, I planted trees and tended gardens. I wrote poetry, I loved and was loved. All of this exists because you chose compassion over violence, in a moment when violence would have been easier." My voice broke, but I continued. "I know you probably suffered for your choice. I know you likely questioned yourself, wondered if you had failed your duty. But please understand, you did not fail. You succeeded in the most important duty of all. You remained human in a situation designed to make us all into killers. You saw me not as a target, but as a person. That is a victory that matters more than any military objective." I paused, wiping my eyes, then finished the letter. "I hope you can forgive yourself for whatever guilt you have carried. I hope you can sleep peacefully, knowing that your mercy created far more good than your rifle ever could have. Thank you, Sergeant Mitchell, for my life and all the lives that came from it. I died grateful to you, and I died hoping you found peace. Your friend across the years, Nguyen Van Than." I set the letter down carefully, unable to control the tears streaming down my face. Duke was crying too, making no attempt to hide it. "He finished writing that 2 weeks before he died," Duke said. "It took him almost a month because his hands were so weak, but he insisted on doing it himself. He said it was too important to dictate to someone else." I looked at the carving again, at the 2 soldiers frozen in their moment of shared humanity. The craftsmanship was beautiful, but more than that, it was accurate. This was exactly how it had happened. Somehow Than had captured the essence of that moment and preserved it in wood. "What happened after he was wounded?" I asked, wanting to know everything now. "How did he manage in Vietnam after the war?" Duke settled back in his chair. "It wasn't easy. The years after 1975 were very difficult for everyone. There was poverty, political re-education, suspicion of anyone who had served. But my father was lucky in some ways. His transfer to non-combat duty and his wound meant he wasn't in any combat units during the final campaigns. He was able to transition to civilian life more easily than many soldiers. He returned to our village in Quang Binh province and began teaching at the local school. The work was hard and the pay was minimal, but he loved it. He said that after years of war and destruction, helping children learn felt like rebuilding the country one mind at a time. He met my mother in 1976. She was also a teacher. They married in 1977 and I was born in 1978. I did the math quickly. Duke was 31 years old, sitting across from me because of a split-second decision I'd made before he was even conceived. Growing up, we didn't know about the story, Duke continued. My father never spoke about the war to us as children. It wasn't until I was in university that he finally told me. I had been studying history and asked him directly about his experiences. That's when he told me about you, about the American soldier who spared his life. But even then, he didn't tell me your name or the exact details. He said some things were too personal, too important to share. It wasn't until after his funeral, when I was going through his belongings, that I found the journal and the letter. I read everything that night, the entire diary, every entry about the war, about his recovery, about his struggles to reconcile what he'd experienced. And running through it all was this thread of gratitude for you, mixed with this profound guilt that he'd survived when so many others hadn't. That struck me hard. Survivor's guilt. I knew it intimately. How many nights had I lain awake thinking about the guys from my unit who didn't make it home, wondering why I survived when they didn't? He carried that guilt his whole life, Duke said. He felt he had to justify his survival by living meaningfully, by contributing something positive to the world. That's why he threw himself into teaching with such passion. He needed to believe that his life had purpose, that your decision to spare him had been worth it. Did he ever find peace with it, I asked. Duke considered the question carefully. I think so, mostly. In his final years, he seemed more content. He spent time with his grandchildren. He gardened. He wrote poetry about ordinary things. Rain on leaves, the taste of morning tea, the sound of children playing. Simple, peaceful things. But I know the nightmares never fully stopped. My mother told me he would wake sometimes, calling out warnings in the middle of the night. The war never completely let him go. I understood that perfectly. The war never let any of us go, not really. It was always there, waiting in the quiet moments, in the darkness before dawn. How long did it take you to find me? I asked. Almost 6 months of searching. Your name was in his journal, but military records from the war are complicated to access, especially across international boundaries. I contacted veteran organizations in America, searched online databases, made dozens of phone calls. Finally, I connected with someone at the Veterans Affairs Office who was willing to help. They couldn't give me personal information directly, but they agreed to contact you on my behalf if I could prove who I was and that my intentions were legitimate. I never got any contact from the VA, I said, confused. That's because I only found your current location 3 days ago. I was planning to write you a letter, but then I thought, no, this news should be delivered in person. So I bought a plane ticket from Ho Chi Minh City to Charleston. I arrived yesterday morning. The magnitude of that gesture hit me. He'd flown halfway around the world to tell me this story, to complete his father's final wish. I can't believe you did that, I said, that you came all this way just to find me. It was important, Duke replied simply. My father's last request was that you know the truth about what your mercy created. How could I not honor that? Besides, I had to meet you for myself, the man who gave me my father, the man whose single act of humanity rippled forward through time to create my entire family. We talked for another hour. Duke told me stories about his father's life, his passion for teaching literature, his terrible singing voice, his addiction to bad coffee, his habit of collecting smooth stones from the river. He showed me more photographs, family gatherings, his father receiving an award for 40 years of teaching service, his father holding his first grandchild with tears of joy streaming down his face. Each image was proof that my decision had mattered, proof that mercy wasn't weakness, proof that in the midst of war's dehumanizing brutality, choosing to see another person's humanity was not just possible but essential. When we finally stepped out of the conference room, the shipyard was quieter. The morning shift was ending. Jenkins approached hesitantly. Everything okay, Mitchell? Yeah, I said, and I meant it. Everything's okay. I took the rest of the day off, something I almost never did. Duke and I went to a quiet restaurant overlooking the harbor. We ate and talked about everything and nothing. He told me about his own life in Vietnam, his work as an engineer, his wife and 2 daughters. I told him about Linda, about my girls, about my decades at the shipyard. What will you do now? Duke asked as we watched the shrimp boats heading out for the evening catch. I don't know, I admitted. For 37 years I've carried this burden, this question about whether I did the right thing. Now I finally have my answer. I'm not sure what it feels like not to carry that weight. My father wrote something else in his journal, Duke said. Near the end, when he knew he was dying, he wrote, I hope the American soldier found peace. I hope he understood that his moment of mercy was a light in the darkness. I hope he knew that some decisions are too important to regret, even when they defy orders, even when they seem impossible to explain. I hope he slept well. That night, after Duke returned to his hotel and I went home to Linda, I told her everything, the whole story, from beginning to end, the valley, the jammed rifle, the choice, the decades of guilt, and finally, the resolution. She held me as I cried, really cried, for the first time since coming home from Vietnam. All the tears I'd held back for 37 years came pouring out, and she just held me, stroking my hair, whispering that it was okay, that I was home, that I was safe. That night, for the first time in decades, I slept through until morning. No nightmares, no waking at 3 a.m. with my heart racing, just deep, peaceful sleep. Duke stayed in Charleston for 3 more days. I took time off work to show him around the city. We walked through the historic district, visited Fort Sumter, ate at local restaurants. We talked about our families, our hopes for the future, about the strange and beautiful ways that life unfolds. On his last evening, I invited him to our home for dinner. Linda cooked a feast, and our daughters came with their families. I introduced Duke and told everyone the story. My granddaughter Emma, who was 6 years old, listened with wide eyes. So you're here because Grandpa was nice to your daddy? She asked Duke with childlike directness. Duke smiled. Yes, exactly that. Your grandfather showed my father kindness when kindness was very difficult, and because of that, I am here today. Emma thought about this seriously, then turned to me. Grandpa, you're a hero. I shook my head. No, sweetheart. I just made a choice to see someone else's humanity. That's not heroism. That's just being decent. That is exactly what makes you a hero, Duke said quietly. Anyone can kill when they're scared or angry. It takes no special courage to pull a trigger, but to lower your weapon when every instinct and every rule tells you not to choose mercy when violence would be easier, that requires real strength. We spent that evening sharing stories, building a bridge between 2 families that had been connected by a single moment decades ago. My daughters were fascinated by Duke, asking him questions about Vietnam, about his father, about what life was like there now. His stories painted a picture of a country that had healed from its wounds, that had chosen to move forward rather than remain trapped in the past. Before he left, Duke gave me his contact information and made me promise to stay in touch. He also left me with a digital copy of his father's entire journal, hundreds of pages that he'd spent months translating into English. I thought you might want to read it, he said, to understand who my father was beyond that single day, to know the man whose life you saved. I've read that journal cover to cover 3 times now. It's an extraordinary document. Part war diary, part philosophical reflection, part love letter to his family and country. Reading it, I came to know Nguyen Van Tan not as the scared young soldier I met in the valley, but as a complete person. A man who loved poetry and coffee, who struggled with doubt and fear, who dreamed of a peaceful world, who raised children with kindness and taught students with passion. One entry, dated April 17, 1981, exactly 10 years after our encounter, particularly struck me. He wrote, "Today marks 10 years since the American soldier spared me. I have thought about him every day of this decade. I wonder if he thinks about me. I wonder if he knows that because of him, I have taught 237 students this year. I wonder if he knows that because of him, my son Duke will start primary school in September. I wonder if he knows that every good thing I do, every kindness I show, every lesson I teach, is an attempt to honor the gift he gave me. I wish I could tell him thank you. I wish I could tell him that his mercy was not wasted." Reading that, I finally understood something. My sleepless nights weren't just about guilt or fear that I'd made a mistake. They were about the fundamental loneliness of carrying a momentous decision alone, with no one to share it with, no way to know if it mattered. Duke's visit had ended that loneliness. I now knew, without any doubt, that my decision had mattered profoundly. The carved wooden box sits on my dresser now, where I can see it first thing every morning and last thing every night. The 2 soldiers facing each other, frozen in their moment of shared humanity. Sometimes I pick it up and run my fingers over the smooth wood, marveling at the craftsmanship and the love that went into creating it. Linda says I'm different now, lighter somehow, like I've put down a heavy pack I'd been carrying for too long. She's right. The weight is gone, replaced by something I never expected to feel. Gratitude. Gratitude that I had the strength to make that choice. Gratitude that Than lived a good life. Gratitude that Duke found me and gave me this gift of knowing. I've started sleeping better. Not perfectly, I don't think I'll ever sleep like I did before Vietnam, but better. The nightmares are less frequent. When I wake in the middle of the night now, instead of replaying worst-case scenarios, I think about Than's journal entries. I think about his children and grandchildren. I think about all the students he taught, all the lives he touched, all the good that rippled forward from that single moment of mercy in a Vietnamese valley. Duke and I email regularly now. He sends photos of his family, updates about life in Vietnam. I send him pictures of Charleston, stories about my grandchildren. We've talked about him bringing his whole family to visit next year, and maybe me and Linda going to Vietnam to meet them all and see the country in peacetime. It's strange how life works. For 37 years I thought I was carrying a burden of doubt and potential mistake. But really, I was carrying an unfinished story, waiting for the ending to reveal itself. Now that I know how it ends, with life and family and love spreading forward through the years, everything looks different. My co-workers have noticed the change too. I'm more present, more engaged, quicker to smile. One of the younger guys asked me what happened, what changed. I thought about how to explain it, and finally just said, I found out that something I did a long time ago turned out better than I thought. That's the truth, as simple as I can state it. For years, I denied the story when asked about the war, not because I was ashamed exactly, but because I couldn't bear to admit that I'd broken the rules, that I'd let an enemy soldier escape, that I'd possibly caused harm through my mercy. Now I talk about it openly. Not to brag, there's nothing to brag about, but to bear witness to what happened, to honor Than's memory by telling the truth about that day and what came after. Last month, I was invited to speak at the local high school's Veterans Day Assembly. I almost declined. I'd turned down similar invitations for decades, but this time I accepted. I stood in front of 200 teenagers and told them about the valley, about the choice, about Than's life, about Duke's visit, about the power of seeing another person's humanity even in impossible circumstances. The students were riveted. Afterward, a young man approached me, maybe 17 years old, with tears in his eyes. My dad's in the army, he said. He's deployed right now in Afghanistan. I'm always so scared for him. But your story gives me hope that even in war, people can choose to be good. Thank you for that. That's when I realized the full truth. The story wasn't just about me and Than anymore. It was bigger than both of us. It was about the possibility of mercy, the power of seeing others as human, the way single choices can ripple forward through time in ways we never imagine. By telling it, I was honoring not just Than's memory, but also offering something to others who struggle with their own impossible choices. I'm 73 years old now. The war was a lifetime ago, but it shaped everything that came after. For most of my life, I saw that day in the valley as a weakness, a failure of nerve, something to hide. Now I understand it differently. It was the moment when I proved to myself that I could hold on to my humanity even when everything around me was designed to strip it away. Than understood that. That's why he circled my name in red ink, underlined it, kept it close for all those years. He knew that what happened between us was important, that it meant something beyond tactics and strategies and military objectives. He knew it was about two young men, strangers and enemies, who looked at each other and chose connection over violence. Until the enemy's son told me why his father never slept again, I lived with the burden of doubt. Now I live with the gift of knowledge. I know that my mercy wasn't wasted. I know that Than honored it every day by living well, by teaching, by loving, by building a future, instead of dwelling in the past. I know that my moment of hesitation, my refusal to kill, created ripples of good that spread further than I could have ever imagined. And now, finally, after 37 years of wondering, of questioning, of carrying that weight in silence, I sleep peacefully, because I know the truth, because the enemy's son crossed the world to tell me that his father never forgot, that my mercy mattered, that choosing humanity over duty was not weakness, but the truest form of strength. The war took so much from so many of us, but in that valley, in that single moment, it gave me something too. It gave me the chance to prove that even in darkness, light can survive. Even in hatred, love can persist. Even in war, mercy is possible. That's the story I denied for years. That's the truth I couldn't face. And that's the gift that Duke and his father finally gave me. The knowledge that the best decision I ever made was the one I spent decades questioning.